So, how would you go about mapping a massive global movement? And I don't just mean its location, but what really drives it. How do you even measure its progress? In this explainer, we're going to break down a book that tackles this exact challenge for a global religious movement, using a really unique, data-driven toolkit. It's a fascinating look at how you can turn a grand vision into a concrete visual strategy.
The author kicks things off with this really powerful quote, and it basically frames the entire project. See, the point isn't just about collecting data for the sake of it. It's about the urgent need for a clear, shared vision. Without one, he argues, any passionate movement is ultimately just going to lose its way.
And that brings us right to the central question, doesn't it? How do you take a mission that's 2,000 years old and translate it into a modern, actionable strategy? A strategy that can be understood by someone in a village in Africa just as easily as someone in a boardroom in America. I mean, this is the huge, ambitious challenge the author sets out to solve.
Okay, so to answer that, we first have to get a handle on the foundational why that's driving this whole project. Before you can start mapping out the territory, you got to know what the mission is. And for the author, that mission is crystal clear.
It all centers on this one concept, the Great Commission. Now, this is the instruction for followers to spread their message to all nations. But here's a fascinating little detail the author points out. The phrase itself isn't actually in the Bible. It was popularized much, much later by the famous missionary Hudson Taylor.
But here's where you see the real scale of the problem. According to Barna Group research that the author cites, get this, only 17% of churchgoers even know what the Great Commission is. That massive 83% gap in awareness, that is the core challenge this book is trying to solve.
But it's not just about a lack of awareness. The author is also wrestling with a very modern problem. How do you communicate complex ideas in a world where we are just constantly bombarded with information?
The author makes this really critical observation about our culture. We've shifted away from an era of deep reading to one of quick visual consumption. I mean, think about it, right? We learn and form ideas from YouTube, from our social media feeds, from infographics. So trying to change the world with a dense, text-heavy book has become way, way harder.
And what's interesting is the author knows this from both sides. He himself is a huge reader, averaging 26 books a year for his entire adult life. He loves deep reading. But he gets that he's an exception, and to reach a broader audience, he has to adapt his strategy to how people actually learn today.
And this brings us to a quote that is really at the heart of his strategy. Data is the new oil. The author fully embraces this idea. To him, up-to-date, well-presented information isn't just helpful, it's the most valuable resource there is for understanding and carrying out a global mission.
So how does this all come together in the author's solution? Well, if people consume information visually, and data is the most valuable resource, then the strategy becomes pretty clear. You have to make the data visual.
This is his guiding philosophy. It's why the book is packed with hundreds of maps, charts, and graphs. He believes these visuals tell stories. They reveal patterns, and they get across complex ideas in a way that words alone just can't. You can grasp an idea in seconds that might otherwise take you pages to read.
And speaking of maps, the author wants us to think a little more critically. So let me ask you, are the maps you see every day, the ones on your phone or in a classroom, actually telling you the truth about the world?
Most of us are familiar with this map, the Mercator projection. I mean, it's everywhere. But it has a huge problem. It dramatically distorts the planet. Land masses near the poles, like Greenland, look enormous, while those near the equator look way smaller than they really are.
Just look at the true size of Africa. It is so vast it can comfortably fit the entire United States, China, India, Japan, and most of Europe inside it. And because this kind of accuracy matters so much, the author chose a more proportional map, the Robinson projection, for the entire book to make sure the data is always presented in its proper context.
This commitment to accuracy goes way beyond maps, though. For any data-driven strategy to work, you need a standardized language so that everyone is counting the same things. That's why the author takes a lot of care to define his key terms.
Take the word country. Seems simple, right? Well, the official definition from the Montevideo Convention is actually pretty complex, and it leads to a ton of debate. Depending on who you ask, the number of countries in the world can be anywhere from 188 to over 300. That's just not useful for consistent data analysis.
So to solve this, the author establishes a simple, practical working definition: the 195 UN countries plus 13 other key territories, giving a consistent total of 208. Now, this isn't a political statement. It's a strategic necessity to make sure every single map and chart is built on the exact same foundation.
He does the same thing for the word church. His definition is functional and incredibly inclusive. Any group of 3 or more Christians meeting regularly. This is so important because it allows him to count the millions of informal house churches and underground movements that are a massive part of the global story, but almost always get missed by official counts.
Okay, so after all this talk about data, maps, and definitions, the author brings us back to the ultimate purpose. What is the human meaning behind all these numbers? He points out that organizations often fall into the trap of just measuring what's easy, what he calls the 3 Bs: budgets, buildings, and butts in the seats. And while these metrics can be useful, he argues they're pretty superficial, and they miss the real story.
And that's because, at the end of the day, it's not about numbers on a page. The author's most important reminder is this: every single data point, whether it represents a Christian or a non-Christian, is a real person. The entire strategic project is ultimately about people.
To wrap things up, the author uses this profound quote from Winston Churchill. This book, this massive collection of data and maps, it's not the final word. It's a snapshot in time, a baseline. It marks perhaps the end of the beginning, providing the vision and the tools needed for the next chapter in this ongoing, ever-evolving global story.